more black people get abortion.
Yes. So I look
Okay,
at that.
why is that, white lady? White lady, why do more black people get abortion? Because abortions are based on what? Lack of access to resources. Because abortions disproportionately happen to impoverished people. Why are black people more impoverished than white people? Because of white supremacy. So thank you for pointing out that people that have been forced into poverty through systemic racism of the last 200 years are forced to abort their baby more because of the lack of resources to be able to raise a baby. And then you, as a white lady, use that as your talking point to take the health care away from those same women that are suffering in those same impoverished neighborhoods because you don't want to acknowledge the white supremacy behind it all. Go ahead.
I hear white people all the time talking about personal responsibility just to hide generations of flat-out theft. We aren't guessing here. The hard numbers from the Federal Reserve prove this system was engineered to hoard white wealth while intentionally starving black and brown neighborhoods.
Black people genetically are not more likely to commit crimes. The areas that they're in the lives that they have, specifically in genuine groups, may up levels of crimes committed in general areas, but you're also not factoring in poverty and other things that motivate people to commit those crimes because of the society that they've lived in. Black people do not commit more crimes than white people on a personality basis. If you're going to say statistically they do, that is only because of impoverished areas in the lives that they've been given because of the implications that have been put on them through, what is it called?
40% of all abortions in this country are performed on black women. In the state of Mississippi, about 78% of all abortions are performed on black women.
78%.
In the state of Georgia, it's 65%. Why is it that there was sort of this predominance of abortions performed on black women? When I began research further about eugenics, I discovered Margaret Sanger was a chief advocate of placing the first abortion facilities in this country in Harlem. It made me a bit suspicious because during slavery, the slave masters would kill often the infants of black women. And sometimes, this is really gruesome, they would slice a pregnant woman's belly open and kill the baby. And so in the black community, from slavery through Jim Crow, there's always been this emphasis on the community protecting the mother, protecting the baby. Fast forward, now there's an emphasis really advanced by these elites. Well, now we need to help out the race by exterminating the low performers. Kind of made me angry that the target of that was framed as helping the country, but the target was black women. Once I saw that, it was game on.
Imagine white people creating a system that keeps certain communities trapped in poverty, trapped in, some challenges by limiting some opportunities to them. And then, turning around and blaming them for the desperate choices that poverty produces. I mean, imagine denying black people equal opportunities, quality education, safer neighborhoods, and, economic stability, then pointing to the consequences as if they happened in a vacuum. Like they happened without somebody's control, without somebody, sending them to black people. Now, whether we're talking about crime, whether we're talking about like health outcomes or abortion, the question isn't just about what choices people make, but what circumstances shape those choices, what forces are behind those choices. But that's the conversation many people avoid, to talk about or to hear, because it forces us to examine causes instead of simply judging people by results, but by the choices they make. But looking at what exactly is contributing to these results. And this discussion we are about to hear, one perspective that argues exactly that, while also exploring the debate surrounding it. What exactly is about the systemic racism, the white supremacy, and everything worth discussing. So brothers and sisters, let's dive into this. Let's hear what these people are trying to share to us. I wish you all the best. If this is your first time, please subscribe so we can have more of these discussions.
Black women fighting for the right to an abortion is like Harriet Tubman fighting for continued slavery. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. Number one, black children are the minority in this country, and yet they are the most unalived children as a result of that procedure. The founder was a known eugenicist and racist who actually intentionally placed the very first clinic in a black neighborhood in Brooklyn and who believed in the forced sterilization of black women and women of color. This is a fact that you can look up, all facts. Not only that, But the same arguments that were used to perpetuate slavery, i.e., that black people were not really people, that they were property, and therefore they weren't deserving of human rights, are the same arguments that are now being used against unborn children, i.e., unborn children are not fully human despite the fact that life begins at conception, and therefore they don't deserve rights. Like, they're the same arguments that were used to justify slavery back then. So the sense is incensing. It's not adding up. 2 + 2 is not making 4. Okay.
In New York, half of all black babies are aborted.
45% of all reported pregnancies among non-Hispanic black women. Wow. Dude, those are crazy numbers.
I think it's tragic.
44% is crazy in abortion. That's a number that's beyond anything I would ever imagined. Even 9% or the 10% for white women is still a pretty high number. But
Holy shit, yeah, that's a high number.
Australia is a disgustingly racist country, and I fear that not a lot of us are actually aware of how deep that systemic racism runs. I was scrolling through my Facebook today and I found this. I'm going to be covering the perpetrator's face, but this is a woman of African appearance who was doxxed completely on Crime Stoppers Port Phillip, and these are some of the comments. Fried chicken jokes, usual suspects, they all look alike, must be another, she thinks she's in Walmart, never would I guess, it's in their genes, gotta love them, hard to believe an African person in Australia would break the law, cultural enrichment, blah blah blah, just denigrating African and black people. Now here is an example of a white person who's committed a crime in the area. The comments have been turned off and their face has been cut off. Comments off, these 2 men sexually assaulted a woman. Again, comments off. In no way am I trying to defend any of the perpetrators, but my question is as to why certain people are given the luxury of anonymity, why African Australians are not afforded that same luxury, and even within that, even if they weren't anonymous, why is the comment section of her post turned on and comment sections of other people who committed, in my opinion, morally worse and more corrupt crimes, like sexually assaulting and physically assaulted people, why are their comments off? Even if they were on, people are not interested in that because the agenda is to spread xenophobia, African Australian hate, black hate, and racism. Why is the police and the police officers or admin people that are running this account, why are they letting racism and hatred run rampant in those comments? That is not a safe situation. I do not feel safe reading that. As an Australian, that is not okay.
When you look at systemic racism, you're looking at trends that have affected the wealth gap between the races historically in the United States. This is not about a person being a racist or your grandma being a racist. It has to do with what the economy looked like for white persons and black persons historically in this country. Back during the time of the Civil War, the white folks had 56 times more wealth on average than a black person. So it was 56 to 1. Just 10 years later, in 1870, after Reconstruction, that gap went from 56 to 1 to 23 to 1. Pretty dramatic improvement in 10 years. The reason for that market improvement is that while black people were now allowed to purchase land and assets, so black wealth was going up, simultaneously white wealth was coming down because what was a huge part of their wealth? Slaves. Human beings that they were no longer allowed to own. By 1900, the gap had closed all the way to 11 to 1. The average white person had 11 times more wealth than the average black person. And then it stalled out. And the reason it stalled out is because black people were still being discriminated against. They didn't have the same access to credit, if any access to credit. Legislative attempts at narrowing the gap were shot down, trying to finish narrowing the gap were shot down, like the 40 acres and a mule thing that never got passed. They faced widespread discrimination in education. The schools were still segregated and they weren't getting the best funding and they weren't getting the best teachers. They were discriminated against in the workforce. Now from 1900, when it was 11 to 1, to 1960, over 60 years, the gap squeezed a little bit smaller to 8 to 1. So for every black family that had $10,000 in total assets, the average white family had $80,000 in total assets, okay? And how did we go from 11 to 1 to 8 to 1? Well, a couple things happened. FDR made it illegal to discriminate against black workers, but only for purposes of the military and government positions. But still, every little bit helps. And then also, you had World War I and World War II. So many white men left the American workforce that black men were finally able to start moving up into higher paid positions. That doesn't mean they were paid the same as the white person who had previously done that job, but they were being paid more than they were previously, and they were getting access to higher skilled work. So then by the 1980s, the gap had closed to 5 to 1. And what was helping close the gap? Civil rights that had taken place between 1965 and 1980. Fair Housing Act, the federal minimum wage that did not discriminate. So those things were helping close that gap just a little bit. So that takes us up to 1980. But what has happened in the last 45 years? We were at 5-to-1 gap. How much have we closed since then? None. In the last 45 years, we've gone backwards. So we are now at a 6-to-1 gap. The average white family has 6 times more wealth than the average black family. And why is that happening? Well, because wealth compounds. It's not just about who has the ability to earn X salary. It's that the white families were starting with more wealth, more property, more stocks, bonds, etc. And they're able to compound that wealth. Whereas if the black and brown populations are starting without those assets, they don't have the ability to compound. They end up having to spend what they earn. Mm-hmm. They have to consume the majority of the income that they're earning just to sustain a living. This isn't about blaming an individual. It's not about vilifying people. What it is about is exploring and understanding the economics behind why we have that gap so that we can address those things with policy moving forward.
Black people know things white people don't. Before I go on, you can check my video notes for the references I used to create this video. Generations of white Americans were raised with a story that made us feel like heroes. We learned about abolitionists, not about the banks that provided insurance on enslaved people. We learned about the civil rights movement, but not about the white mobs who terrorized black families for trying to move into a better neighborhood. Systemic racism didn't just hurt black people, although they were the ones that took most of it, but it also misinformed white people, and that pisses me off. It trained us to see unfairness and injustice as progress. That's why when black folks talk about redlining, medical racism, or why certain laws hit their communities so much harder, many white people are just confused, or worse, and probably more commonly, they're defensive. It's not just ignorance, it's conditioning. The system made sure we didn't see the whole picture, because once we did, we might start asking too many questions. White people need to hear the truth from people who live it. But that takes a toll on black people. They've had to survive what we've only begun to learn about. And it's not fair to put that burden on them. That's why I study, listen, and talk to other white folks. It's not about guilt, and it's not about blame. It's about repair. Black people already know this history. White people need to know it too, because it's our history. It's our history too. Silence keeps the system working in the way that is unjust. Don't be afraid. You should be mad about what was kept from you on purpose. Now you have the opportunity to learn about it and start organizing your life differently. I am not an expert, but I love learning. You can put my username into your search engine. Scroll down if you want to help me out. You guys are the greatest. Get curious.
I hear white people all the time talking about personal responsibility just to hide generations of flat-out theft. We're guessing here. The hard numbers from the Federal Reserve prove this system was engineered to hoard white wealth while intentionally starving black and brown neighborhoods. Let's look at the receipts. I don't get it with these black people, you know. Slavery ended over 150 years ago, y'all. So they really need to stop blaming the past for their problems today, you know. Get their shit together. The Federal Reserve's official data proves the exact math of this theft. Government tracking shows that after decades of banks blocking black families, a typical white family sits on $284,000 in wealth, while the typical black family has just $44,000. That's not a gap. It's a structural chokehold. No, y'all, they expect handouts for everything, instead of just pulling themselves up by their bootstraps like our ancestors had to do. Historical land records and government deeds prove white wealth didn't come from fucking bootstraps. It came from massive handouts. The government gave away millions of acres of free land to white ancestors while passing explicit laws that block black Americans from owning property or building equity. White wealth was subsidized. Black wealth was legally outlawed. You know, whenever they move into a good neighborhood, the property values drop, and the local schools, they just go completely downhill. A massive study by the Brookings Institution exposed exactly how housing market cheats black families. The data shows appraisers routinely undervalue homes in black neighborhoods, stealing an average of $48,000 in equity from every single black homeowner. That built-in racism drains billions out of black communities and starves local schools of funding daily. They're on welfare living off our hard-earned tax dollars while the rest of us work real jobs. Official data from the Department of Health and Human Services blows this lie completely out of the water. The math proves that while systemic racism forces a higher percentage of black families to need a safety net, the actual raw census numbers show that white Americans are and always have been the largest group using welfare in the country, period. Well, you know, they don't really know how to maintain property or build anything of value until we come in and gentrify it. Decades of municipal banking and city funding records prove capital is intentionally choked out of black zip codes. The tracking data shows banks reject loans and cities withhold infrastructure money to starve these neighborhoods on purpose. Once property values are artificially crushed, white developers swoop in and buy the land for pennies and flip it for a profit. You know, I don't really mind them working here, but I just don't think different races should mix or live together, you know. Modern demographic maps and census tracking prove segregation is not an accident. It is a weapon. Civil rights data shows white supremacy uses segregated neighborhoods to hoard the highest property values and lock down the best public school funding exclusively for white kids. Hey, white folks, let's be completely honest. If you still believe in the myth of meritocracy, the fairy tale that everyone in America gets exactly what they earn, you are trapped in a massive white fucking delusion and lie. This is pure white narcissism. It lets you pretend your success is 100% your own hard work, while completely blinding you to a system that hoards cash for white people by actively stealing it from black and brown communities. This is the luxury of white privilege and racial illiteracy. You get to protect your comfort while ignoring the hard math. But if you think stealing the money is bad, wait until you see how they enforce it. In part 3, we are breaking down the double standards of a rigged legal system and how they use the police as a shield to protect this wealth. Sleep on that. Part 3 is coming soon.
Welcome, brothers and sisters. Now, before we break this thing down, I think let's make one thing clear. I'm not here to encourage abortion. I'm also not here to celebrate it either. Personally, I would rather love to see, fewer lives. Actually, no lives lost before they even begin. In fact, somebody commented this and I think it really makes sense. Look at this comment. Somebody said, this explains why the black community has such a low population despite being in this country as long as white people. But at the same time, I also believe we would also ask some difficult questions about, the conditions that influence people's decision. Yeah, but I like the comment, by the way. I like it really, has some message behind it. But the issue is, it's not about, abortion. We are taking abortion as a result, okay? So remember, we are here to address what exactly is causing these results, what exactly is causing, the choices people make, what exactly is behind all this. I think it's always good to deal with the cause than to deal, with the choice or the result afterward. Imagine if a society creates barriers that make success harder for some communities, especially, like black community, then we shouldn't pretend those barriers have nothing to do with the outcomes or, the choices that, come later. right? Now, with that said, let's talk about, one of the biggest messages people are taking in this discussion. I think we have just like 5, I think. Now, number one, the conversation is not only about abortion. It's also about the circumstances surrounding this abortion. You see, many people argue that when communities experience, persistent poverty, fewer opportunities, struggling schools, unstable housing, and limited access to like healthcare and other important things, those pressures can, these pressures can affect life-changing decisions. Okay, people can, make decisions according to challenges that are coming because of this. So whether somebody agrees with that argument or you don't agree, but I think it's part of the broader debate, and yeah, it's worth discussing. Number two, accountability and environment can both, matter. They all contribute to the choices people make. I mean, it's easy to look at somebody's, final decision, somebody's, final choice, okay, what they do finally as a result. It's much harder to examine everything that happened before they reached that moment. Like, what exactly made this person do this? What exactly make this person do this? You see, some people believe personal responsibility should be the entire focus. Others argue that environment plays a significant role in shaping choices. The reality is, these conversations are rarely simple. And yeah, before we judge people by, the choices they make, I think it's also good to do statistics. I mean, to do, some searching. Okay, what exactly is causing this? People have been making research only to see, maybe black people are the ones who can commit more crimes according to statistics, all those things. But have you ever had the time to look at what are the contributions to this? Why are black people looking like they're contributing, like they're committing more crimes? Do you see, have you ever had the time to do a deeper research to see why? If you do, you see that if that is true, that they commit more crimes, you will find out that it's like not their fault. There's somebody up there, there's somebody, like the system itself is causing them, is forcing them to do this, and then you turn around and blame them. That's what can, people find if they, look into it deeper than just, having the racist eye, like, you do more crimes, that's all, that's the way you are. So yeah, that's it. Number three, people are debating whether systems can influence outcomes. Now let's talk about it. Throughout the video, some voices are believing that the historical discrimination and the unequal opportunities have had like long-term effects on many black communities. Others disagree, but I think it places greater emphasis on individual choices, regardless of like where somebody stands. It's worth examining evidence carefully instead of reducing everything, to slogans. What exactly are you doing after you have heard that? Now, number four, labels don't solve problems. Calling black people lazy, calling black people, like they're just criminals, calling black people, you're just, irresponsible, calling black people, you just love abortions, calling black people, you just love to be poor, you just love to, you don't want to work hard. None of these labels automatically explain why certain communities, why black communities face different outcomes. If we want real solutions, we have to be willing to ask, difficult questions, challenging questions, even when the answers make people uncomfortable. I think now that point really makes sense. Number five, every life has a value. We can't talk about this thing about abortion without, recognizing the innocent lives of these children who are dying. And when we link it to that comment where, somebody is trying to say, this is the reason why, the black community has a low population, but it seems like, it's also the community that, like kills more children, like through abortion, like as somebody said. So I think that's why, conversation like this becomes so emotional, because people may have so many things to talk. Others have all the reasons to justify it. Others don't have all the reasons to justify it. So, regardless of which side you are, but I think some people focus on protecting the unborn, children. Others focus on the social and economic pressures that the expectant mothers, these pregnant mothers, may face. So those concerns don't have to cancel each other. We can care about life while also caring about the conditions where families, have more support and more opportunities. Now, whether you agree with everything that was said in this video or you don't agree, I think there's one lesson that stands out. Instead of only reacting to the consequences, I think it's also good to sit down and ask what contributes to those consequences, those outcomes, those choices in the first place. If communities are struggling, we should ask a bigger question like, why are they struggling? If communities, are unequal, we should ask how they become unequal. White community and black community, they don't have, similar opportunities according to what's in the system. We need to have those questions like why before we say why are black people behaving this way. And if people are making painful decisions, we should care enough to understand the pressures behind those decisions, behind those choices, even if we ultimately disagree with the choices themselves. Imagine you are sending somebody to steal. I mean, not sending as such, but maybe you are forcing them to steal because you're not giving them food. They're in the house, okay, but you're not giving them food and they are starving every single day. The moment they find some food, okay, they will go and eat it without asking somebody because they just have to, save themselves from the hunger they're having. And then you go and blame them. What exactly? I mean, conversations become, far more productive when people replace their, assumptions with honest discussions. But that's how people learn. That's how communities grow. That's how communities come together and solve little problems instead of simply arguing over symptoms or arguing over the results. Okay, let's see what exactly is causing people. So anyway, brothers and sisters, what exactly is your biggest takeaway from this discussion? Do you think people are spending too much time judging outcomes and not enough time to examine the circumstances that shape those outcomes? Or do you think personal responsibility should always, come first before we judge? Share your thoughts respectively down below in the comments. And if this is your first time, please don't forget to subscribe. And if you found some value in this video, please don't forget to, give it a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm. Otherwise, I wish you all the best and I'll see you in the next one.